The bell tower's shadow. The town of Ashford had a silence to it that unnerved Sheriff Daniel Cole from the day he arrived. It wasn't the kind of silence that came with the peaceful countryside, chirping crickets, distant dogs, and the hum of cicadas. No, this was something else. It was as though the air itself held its breath, as though the land had grown wary of speaking too loudly, afraid of waking something that listened. Ashford was small, barely more than a stretch of weathered buildings along a single road, flanked by fields and dense woods. At the center of it all stood the church, its bell tower leaning like an old sentinel watching over the townsfolk. The towers were blackened with rot, the bell itself rumored to have cracked decades ago, when lightning struck it one stormy night. Supposedly, it hadn't rung since. Supposedly, Daniel had heard the story more than once in his short time as sheriff. It always came in the same hushed tone, with eyes darting toward the tower. When the bell rings at 3 a.m., someone dies before sunrise. Every town had its folklore, and to Daniel, this was no different than ghost lights in the swamp or headless horsemen told around a campfire. Small towns thrived on legends. They gave people something to cling to, something to explain away the misfortunes that plagued ordinary lives. Still, there was something about the way people said in Ashford. Not a joke, not a rumor, but a warning. The sheriff settles in. On his third night in Ashford, Daniel sat in his office, sipping burnt coffee from a chipped mug. The clock ticked past midnight, and the streets outside his window were empty. He was reviewing an old case file left by his predecessor, Sheriff Milton Hayes, who had died suddenly the year before. Hayes's handwriting was a scrawl, but one word kept repeating in the margins: Bell. Daniel rubbed his eyes. He didn't buy into superstitions. He'd worked in larger cities before taking this quiet post, and he'd seen the real horrors people inflicted on one another: violence, betrayal, the endless cycle of desperation. Ghost stories were distractions. A knock at the office door startled him. He opened it to find Mrs. Green, the elderly woman who ran the bakery down the street. She clutched a shawl around her bony shoulders, her eyes wide. "Sheriff," she whispered, "did you hear it?" "Hear what?" "The bell." Daniel frowned. "It's broken, ma'am. You must have heard something else." Her face tightened. "Don't mock me. It rang, clear as day. 3 tolls. And you mark my words, Sheriff, someone in this town is going to be dead before dawn." Before he could respond, she turned and shuffled away into the dark. The first toll. Daniel sat back at his desk, unease prickling at him. The rational part of his mind wanted to dismiss it. Bells didn't toll on their own. The clapper inside that iron husk hadn't moved in years. But as the night dragged on, he found himself staring out the window at the silhouette of the bell tower, a jagged shadow against the moonlight. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the phone on his desk rang, shattering the silence. It was Deputy Laura Perkins, young and earnest, her voice trembling on the line. "Sheriff, you need to come to Main Street. It's Mr. Clark. He's dead." Daniel's stomach dropped. He grabbed his coat and rushed into the night. Death on Main Street. Howard Clark had been the town's undertaker, a quiet man in his 60s who lived above the funeral parlor. When Daniel arrived, he found Laura pale-faced by the door. Inside, Clark was slumped over his desk, eyes wide open, skin gray and clammy. A half-written obituary sat beneath his stiff hand. No signs of struggle, no wounds, no forced entry. Laura whispered. His heart just stopped. Daniel called the coroner, but in his gut, unease gnawed at him. He replayed Mrs. Green's words. 3 tolls. As the body was carried out, Daniel stepped outside for air. The bell tower loomed over the street, black against the stars. His jaw clenched. He thought of the case file on his desk, Sheriff Hayes scribbling Bell over and over, like a man trying to warn whoever came after him. Whispers among the town. The next morning, Ashford buzzed with whispers. People gathered in small clusters outside shops, their faces grim, their eyes sliding toward the tower. Daniel entered the diner for breakfast, and conversation stopped. He felt the weight of every gaze. Finally, Mrs. Green muttered from her booth, "You see now? The bell's never wrong." "It's a coincidence," Daniel said firmly, though his voice lacked conviction. "Coincidence doesn't happen in Ashford," muttered a farmer, stabbing at his eggs. Ask anyone here. Every time it tolls, someone's gone before the sun rises. Another woman added, and it doesn't stop. Once it starts, it'll keep ringing. Again and again. Until what? Daniel asked. Silence. No one met his eye. A visit to the tower. That evening, Daniel walked to the churchyard, determined to put the rumors to rest. The chapel itself was abandoned, its doors chained shut, windows boarded. Vines crawled up its stone walls. The tower loomed overhead. Up close, the bell looked ancient, its surface mottled with rust. A long crack split down the side, jagged like a wound. The rope that once rang had hung frayed and severed, swaying slightly in the wind. He climbed the creaking stairs, flashlight in hand, until he reached the belfry. Dust coated everything. Pigeons scattered as he stepped inside. He examined the bell closely, solid, unmoving. Impossible, he muttered. But as he turned to leave, he felt it, a vibration, faint, deep within the iron, like a heartbeat. The hairs on his neck rose. The second night, that night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the clock. 2:45 a.m., 2:58, 3 o'clock. And then it came, bong, a deep, resonant toll, echoing through the town. The glass of water on his desk trembled. Bong. His chest tightened. He wanted to deny it, to rationalize it, but the sound was undeniable. Bong. The final toll faded into silence. Almost instantly, the phone rang. It was Deputy Laura again, her voice shaking. Sheriff, it's happened again. Mrs. Green. She's gone. Daniel closed his eyes. His hands trembled on the receiver. The sheriff's doubt. By dawn, Daniel stood in the graveyard, watching as Mrs. Green's body was carried to the morgue. Her death, like Clark's, had been sudden, her heart stopping in her sleep. The townsfolk gathered, whispering and glancing at the tower. Their fear hung thick in the air, almost tangible. Daniel clenched his fists. He wasn't ready to admit it, not yet, but doubt gnawed at him like a worm inside an apple. The bell had rung, and death had followed, and deep in his bones, he knew it wasn't over. Whispers in the town. The morning after Mrs. Green's death, Sheriff Daniel Cole found himself staring at the bell tower from his office window, unable to shake the memory of a sound. He had tried convincing himself it had been an illusion, a trick of the wind, or his own exhausted mind. But the phone call that followed, announcing Mrs. Green's sudden death, had shattered that fragile excuse. The town was different now. Ashford had always been quiet, but after 2 deaths in 2 nights, it fell hollow. Shop doors remained closed. Curtains were drawn tight. People only left their houses in pairs, whispering as they hurried down the streets. Daniel felt the weight of their gazes when he passed, their unspoken words pressing in on him. The bell's never wrong. The bell takes who it wants. A town's silent judgment. At the diner, Daniel slid into a booth, hoping for coffee and answers. But the room went quiet the moment he entered. From the counter, the cook muttered, "You're the sheriff. Do something." "About what?" Daniel snapped. "The bell? It's a hunk of metal. It can't kill anyone." A woman at the back hissed, "Tell that to Mrs. Green. Tell that to Howard Clark." Another voice added, "And Sheriff Hayes before them." He heard it too. That made Daniel pause. "Hayes? He died of a stroke." The cook shook his head. After the bell rang, 3 nights in a row, he told us it was nonsense, same as you, and then he was gone. Daniel's stomach knotted. He remembered the case file he'd been reading. Hayes's messy scrawl, the word bell underlined again and again. Had the old sheriff known more than he let on? Searching the past. Determined. Daniel marched to the county records office. Dusty ledgers lined the shelves, filled with the town's births, deaths, and marriages. Hours slipped by as he flipped through yellow pages. And then he saw it. For over a century, deaths had clustered in strange patterns. Spates of sudden heart failures, accidents, and unexplained deaths, always following nights when townsfolk reported hearing the bell. Sometimes years passed in silence, but when the tolling began, it came in threes. 3 tolls, 3 deaths, His hands trembled as he traced the dates with his finger. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. He found a note scribbled in the margin of an old volume, in handwriting that didn't match the official scribe. Just 4 words. The ringer still calls. The legend of Father Silas. That evening, Daniel visited the town's historian, Martha Klein, a retired teacher whose house overflowed with books. When he mentioned the bell, her eyes clouded, as if she had been waiting for the question all along. "You've heard it, haven't you?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer. Martha nodded grimly. "Then it's begun again." She led him to a stack of worn journals and photographs. The story goes back to the late 1800s, when Ashford was a mining town. The church was run by Father Silas Crane, a priest, but also something else. Something else. Daniel prompted. He dabbled in rituals, old rites not found in any holy book. He believed the bell tower was a conduit, a place where the boundary between worlds was thin. He said the bell could summon spirits, bind them, even bargain with them. Daniel frowned. Superstition. Martha's eyes hardened. Call what you like, Sheriff, but people feared him. And when miners started vanishing, they blamed him, said he was sacrificing souls to whatever answered his call. They dragged him to the square and hanged him beneath the bell. But before he died, he cursed his town, said the bell would toll for him until Ashford itself was swallowed. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Every toll is his hand reaching from the grave. Every death is him feeding on us still. Unease in the night. Daniel left Martha's house with the story gnawing at him. He wanted to dismiss it, to laugh at the idea of a dead priest ringing a bell from beyond the grave. But the unease in his chest told him otherwise. That night, he patrolled the streets alone, the air heavy with expectation. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind carried a whisper. The town slept fitfully, but Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the tower. At 2:59 a.m., silence blanketed Ashford. Not even the crickets sang. Then at the stroke of 3, bong. The sound rolled across the town, vibrating in his very bones. Bong. The windows of nearby houses rattled. Dogs barked wildly, straining against their chains. Bong. And then silence again. Daniel stood frozen, breath sharp in his throat. He pulled out his radio. "Laura, you hear that?" Static answered, and then her shaky voice. "Sheriff, it's bad. You need to get to the Harris farm. Now!" The third death. The Harris farm lay on the outskirts of town, a crumbling barn beside fields that hadn't been plowed in years. Daniel's cruiser tore down the dirt road, headlights cutting through the dark. He found Laura on the porch, pale and trembling. Inside, he saw Tom Harris sprawled across the floor, his face twisted in terror, eyes glassy and unseeing. His wife knelt beside him, sobbing uncontrollably. Laura whispered, "No wounds, no struggle, same as the others. He just died." Daniel knelt beside the body. Tom's mouth was open, as if he had been screaming when death took him, for the first time since arriving in Ashford. True fear pierced Daniel's chest. The town turns. By dawn, word had spread. 3 nights, 3 tolls, 3 deaths. The townsfolk gathered outside the sheriff's office, their faces etched with grief and rage. An old man shouted, "The bell's cursed, always has been." Another cried, "You're the sheriff. Why haven't you stopped it?" Daniel raised his hands. "How do you expect me to stop a piece of iron from ringing itself?" "The bell isn't ringing itself," a woman shouted. "It's him, Father Silas, and he won't stop until someone takes his place." The crowd murmured in agreement, voices swelling with panic. Daniel felt their fear pressing on him, suffocating. He had faced angry mobs before, but never one united not by anger, but by terror, alone with the tower. That night, Daniel returned to the church alone. The tower loomed over him, its shadow long and jagged under the moonlight. He pushed open the chain doors with a crowbar. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust and mildew. His flashlight beam caught remnants of pews, shattered glass, and a pulpit draped in rotting cloth. He climbed the spiral stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The air grew colder as he neared the top. When he reached the belfry, He froze. The bell was swinging, slowly, rhythmically. The frayed rope swayed with it, though no hand pulled it. Each creak of it would made his skin crawl. Daniel gripped his gun, though he knew it would be useless against iron or a ghost. He forced himself closer, raising his flashlight. The crack in the bell seemed wider now, jagged edges glowing faintly, as if embers smoldered within. And then he heard it, a whisper, low, rasping, carried on the vibration of the bell. "Your turn, Sheriff." Daniel stumbled back, heart hammering. The tower seemed to close in around him, the shadows thickening, the air charged with something ancient and hungry, a growing dread. He fled the church, the whisper still echoing in his ears. By the time he reached his office, dawn was breaking, but he felt no relief. He poured himself a glass of whiskey with shaking hands, staring at the tower through the window. The truth was undeniable now. The bell was no longer just a story, no longer just folklore. It was a curse that had claimed 3 lives in 3 nights. And with chilling certainty, Daniel knew what the whisper meant. The next toll would not be for another townsfolk. It would be for him. The curse of the bell ringer. Sheriff Daniel Cole hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bell, not just its hulking, rusted body, but the way it had moved, swinging on its own, glowing faintly from its crack like the ember of some monstrous forge. And always, always he heard the whisper, "Your turn, Sheriff." The words weren't a memory. They lived in him now, stitched into the rhythm of his heartbeat. Ashford's rotting secrets. Daniel pored over records again, trying to bury himself in logic. He wanted to find cracks in the legend, explanations hidden in the mundane. But the more he searched, the darker the truth became. One ledger from 1891 described the execution of Father Silas Crane. The handwriting of the town scribe was stiff and formal. The priest was condemned for blasphemy, heresy, and ritual murder. His last words, shouted as the rope snapped, were a curse upon Ashford. He swore the bell would toll as his voice beyond the grave, claiming the souls of the unworthy until the town repented. The townsfolk buried him in an unmarked grave, but the earth refused him. Each dawn, his coffin rose back to surface. Finally, they sealed him inside the bell tower wall. Daniel's throat went dry as he reread the last line. He glanced at the churchyard through the blinds. Had he been standing in the presence of the priest's remains, entombed inside the very structure where the bell still swung? Another record from the 1920s described 3 miners who attempted to destroy the bell with hammers. By morning, all 3 were dead, crushed beneath collapsed mine shafts on opposite ends of town. Coincidence? Or retribution? Daniel's rational mind strained against the evidence. But as he traced the patterns, each toll claiming its victim, each attempt to fight the curse ending in death, he realized the truth was no longer in question. The only mystery left was why the bell had chosen him. A visit from Martha. Martha Klein arrived at the sheriff's office that afternoon, her face drawn, her hands clutching a battered book. "You've been marked," she said without preamble. Daniel bristled. "I don't believe in marks. I believe in facts." Her eyes were sad, pitying. "Then believe this. The bell doesn't toll at random. It feeds. First, it takes from the town. Then, it takes the one who denies it." She pushed the book toward him. Inside were sketches of the bell tower, crude drawings of Father Silas with hollow eyes, and passages written in Latin. One translation read, "The ringer shall not rest until another takes his place at the rope. When his chosen heir resists, the toll shall call him thrice. If he does not surrender, the bell shall claim his soul." Daniel closed the book sharply. "Heir? You think I was chosen for this nonsense?" Martha's voice dropped. "Why do you think Sheriff Hayes died after hearing the bell? Why do you think it comes for lawmen, the ones who swear to protect this town?" Silas hated authority, hated judgment. Each sheriff since his death has been tested. Daniel shook his head, unwilling to let the words take root. Yet deep inside, something cold told him she was right. A sleepless town. That night, Ashford felt like a coffin. Streets were deserted, lights extinguished early. Even the wind seemed to hold back, as if the town itself were listening for the strike of 3. Daniel sat at his desk, revolver beside him, unable to read or think. The clock crept toward midnight. His body ached with exhaustion, but adrenaline kept his nerves raw. At 2:55, the silence grew unbearable. He stepped outside, the night air sharp in his lungs. The tower loomed against the starlight, taller than it had any right to be. Its shadow stretched long like a skeletal finger pointing at him. 2:59. The first toll came like thunder. Bong. Daniel's vision blurred. He staggered, gripping the porch rail. Bong. The second toll rattled his bones. He swore he felt the ground itself pulse. Bong. The third struck not in his ears, but in his chest, as if the bell's clapper had swung against his very heart. And then came the whisper again, clearer this time. Your turn, Sheriff. The haunting. After the third toll, Daniel wasn't the same. He heard the bell even when it wasn't ringing. In the scrape of boots on gravel, in the hollow slam of doors, in the hollow echo of his own footsteps. He saw shadows twitching at the edges of his vision, figures robed in black, drifting at the corners of the streets. One night, while patrolling, he saw Father Silas, not as a memory, not as an imagining, but standing beneath the tower. His body was tall and gaunt, draped in decayed robes, his face hidden beneath a hood. Where his hands should have been were charred stumps, yet still he held the rope, pulling. The bell above him swung with each tug, though no sound came. Daniel raised his gun, but the figure lifted its head, and beneath the hood were not eyes but two burning cracks of light, glowing like the fracture in the bell itself. Daniel fired. The shot echoed through the night, but the figure dissolved into mist. From the tower, the bell whispered again. Your turn, Sheriff. Confessions of the dead. The next day, Daniel forced himself to Martha's house again. He demanded to know how to end it. She shook her head. There is no ending it. Silas made sure of that. The only way the toll stops is when someone takes his place. That's the meaning of the curse. That's why the sheriffs keep dying. They resist, and the bell does not forgive resistance. So you're saying I meant to what? Ring the bell for him? Kill for him? Daniel barked. Not meant. Marked. And if you refuse, you'll die, and the curse will wait for the next fool who wears your badge. Her words sank into him like knives. He wanted to scream, to deny it, but the truth had taken root. His fate was tied to that tower now. Breaking point. That night, Daniel barricaded himself in the office. He drank half a bottle of whiskey, staring at the revolver on his desk. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind carried a whisper. At 2:30, he swore he heard the rope dragging across wood. At 2:45, faint footsteps circled the building. By 2:58, shadows pressed against the windows, dozens of faces watching him from the dark. When the first toll came, the glass of his whiskey shattered. The second toll split the ceiling plaster. The third toll nearly drove him to his knees. Through the haze, he saw Silas standing inside the office, no longer a shadow but a man of bone and ash. His hollow eyes bored into Daniel's, and in a voice like grinding stone he spoke, not whispered, but spoke. Bow to me, Sheriff. Take the rope, or the bell will hollow you out from within. Daniel raised his revolver, hand shaking, over my dead body. Silas's skeletal grin widened. That can be arranged. The sheriff's realization. When dawn came, Daniel found himself collapsed on the floor, revolver empty, walls riddled with bullet holes. But Silas was gone. The only sound was the wind through the trees. Exhausted, he stumbled outside. The town was waking, but people avoided his eyes, whispering as he passed. They knew. They had seen this cycle before. And now it was his turn. Back in his office, Daniel sat at his desk and stared at the tower. He understood it now. The curse wasn't about random deaths. The tolls weren't warnings. They were summons. The bell had called him 3 times. He was the next ringer. If he refused, it would kill him like the others. If he accepted, he would become the town's executioner, ringing the bell that stole lives. There was no winning, only choosing how to lose. The final toll. Sheriff Daniel Cole woke before midnight, drenched in sweat. The nightmares had become unbearable. Visions of himself standing in the bell tower, hands gripping the rope as faces of the townsfolk twisted in silent screams beneath him. But tonight wasn't just another night. He knew it in his bones. This was the night it would end, one way or another, preparing for the tower. He strapped on his revolver, though deep down he knew bullets wouldn't save him. Still, the weight of the gun steadied his hands. He slipped his father's silver cross into his pocket, the last keepsake of a man who'd raised him to fight for justice. As he left the office, Ashford was silent as a grave. Doors and shutters were drawn, lanterns extinguished. The town wasn't sleeping. It was hiding. Every man, woman, and child knew what was about to happen, and none dared intervene. The bell tower loomed above the town square like a skeletal sentinel. Its spire pierced the night sky, the fractured bell glowing faintly within as though lit from some hellish furnace. Daniel swallowed hard and began to climb. Inside the tower, the air grew colder as he ascended the spiral staircase. The wood groaned beneath his boots, each creak echoing like a scream. Shadows clung to the walls, flickering and shifting though no light source was there. Halfway up, he froze. The rope, it hung from the ceiling, frayed and blackened, swaying gently though no wind touched it. As he reached out, a cold hand seized his wrist. Daniel spun, revolver raised. Father Silas stood inches away. His robes were tattered and dripping with ash, his hollow eyes burning with that same cracked light. "You've come," Silas rasped, his voice like rust on iron. "At last, one who does not run, one who accepts his inheritance." Daniel gritted his teeth. "I didn't come to accept anything. I came to end this." Silas's skeletal grin widened. "End it? Fool! You are it. Without the ringer, the curse cannot live. Without the curse, this town cannot stand. They built their peace upon my sacrifice. Now you will carry it forward." The third toll. The bell began to move. Slowly at first, then faster, until the clapper struck metal. Bong! The sound ripped through Daniel's skull. His vision blurred. The world tilting as shadows poured from the walls. Faceless figures, the souls of those taken by the bell. They circled him, whispering, pulling at his arms. Bong! Daniel staggered, falling to his knees. His revolver slipped from his hand. The rope dangled before him like a serpent, waiting to coil around his throat. Silas towered over him. "Bow, Sheriff. Take your place, and the toll will cease. Resist, and the bell will hollow you out until nothing remains." Bong! The third toll struck like a hammer to the chest. Daniel screamed, clutching his heart as if it were being torn from him. In that moment, he saw flashes of Ashford's history. The lynching of Silas, the miners crushed in their shafts, Sheriff Hayes' body hanging from the gallows, each death tied to the bell. It had never been about justice or faith. It had always been about feeding the curse. The choice. Daniel dragged himself to his feet, every bone screaming. He grabbed the silver cross from his pocket, clutching it like a weapon. "You curse this town because they betrayed you," Daniel said, his voice ragged. "But I won't be your puppet. I won't damn myself to carry your hatred." Silas's eyes flared. "Then you choose death." The rope lashed out like a whip, wrapping around Daniel's wrist. He cried out as it burned into his skin. Shadows surged forward, clawing at him, pulling him toward the bell. With his free hand, Daniel reached for his revolver. His fingers brushed the grip, slick with sweat. He fired once, twice, the bullets tearing through shadow, but the figures only howled and reformed. The rope tightened, dragging him upward. He dangled beneath the bell, chest heaving, as Silas raised his arms in triumph. "Ring, Sheriff, or fall." Defiance. Through the haze of pain, Daniel remembered his father's words. A lawman's duty is to protect, even if it costs him everything. If he took Silas's place, the town might survive another year, but at the price of his soul. If he resisted, maybe the curse would claim him, but perhaps it would weaken the cycle, loosen the chain Silas had bound around Ashford. He made his choice. Daniel wrapped the rope tighter around his wrist, not to pull, but to anchor himself. With his other hand, he pressed the silver cross against the rope. The effect was immediate. The rope screamed, fibers blackening, unraveling as smoke poured from it. Silas shrieked, his hollow eyes blazing. "You dare defy me? Daniel shouted above the tolling. "I'd rather burn than bow." The bell cracked wider, molten light spilling through. The tower shook violently, stones splitting, with groaning under the weight of centuries of sin. Collapse! The rope snapped. Daniel fell, hitting the wooden planks hard. Above him, the bell swung wildly, fissures spreading across its surface. Silas lunged, his skeletal frame burning with fury, but the shadows turned on him. The very souls he had enslaved wrapped around his arms, dragging him back toward the cracking bell. "No!" Silas screamed, thrashing. "You are mine!" The bell gave one final, deafening bong, then shattered. The explosion lit the tower in blinding light. Silas's figure dissolved into ash, his scream carried away on the wind as the shadows vanished. Daniel shielded his face, the force throwing him down the staircase. He tumbled through splintering beams, crashing into dirt outside as the tower collapsed behind him in a storm of dust and fire. Dawn. When Daniel awoke, the sun was rising over Ashford. The bell tower was gone, reduced to rubble. The cursed toll had been silenced. The townsfolk gathered at a distance, staring in awe and fear. None approached. None thanked him. They only whispered. Daniel stood, his body broken but alive, on his wrist. A deep burn remained where the rope had bound him, seared into his flesh like a brand. He realized the curse might not be gone, only dormant. But for now, Ashford was free. He holstered his revolver, turned his back on the ruins, and walked into the dawn. Behind him, in the settling dust, a faint sound lingered. Not a toll, but a whisper carried on the wind. "This isn't over, Sheriff."